and now let's really get into this session. And we've heard yesterday already several times that it's very important to tailor any measures to the conditions in your city, but at the same time that good ideas do travel. Campaigns and political strategies do travel from city to city, and the wheel does not need to be reinvented in each place again and again. And people also, more importantly, even maybe they share resources together and build up resources jointly in networks across cities. But how these processes work exactly, what does travel exactly, and whether that's always done strategically or sometimes very organically, and all those details. Now, these are the questions that we want to raise in this session, and this is what Sophia, my colleague Sophia Silverton, has prepared a session for. So now I hand over to you, Sophia.
Thanks, Philip. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the arena. It's nice to see you. It was really fun to do a mingling session this morning in the chat roulette and to get to know everybody there. And maybe I'll meet more of you personally. And again, in that session, Philip was talking about infection after this one. So as Philip said, my name is Sophia Silverton. Many of you may have seen me yesterday, but in case we have new joiners for today, I've been working with the University of Freiburg on the Urbana project for the past couple of years. Although my hometown is, I'm in Germany now, but my hometown is back in Canada, in Toronto, Canada. So I'm really happy to help kick things off today with a presentation on learning between cities, as Philip mentioned. And I'm gonna start to share my screen just for everybody, and it'll take a moment. Okay. So for some of you, you may have attended our pre-arena webinar, which was back in February. And I would say that there's some similar content here, but hopefully I've added some more details to make it interesting to you as well. And if you are curious about any of the examples that I share or any of the references that I talk about, feel free to send me a private message in Zoom later on as well, and I can clarify that for you. So why should we talk about learning in this arena? First of all, Urbana's central role is to be a knowledge broker. So we're all about exchange and collaboration between cities and from learning from experiences in other places and from your places. And cities themselves are very vibrant places for exchange of knowledge as well within a wider global network. And on the screen now, you can see an image taken from our first arena in Rotterdam in person. Now, also, if done well, and I'll get into what well means later, learning within and between cities has the potential to also reduce injustice in urban sustainability governance. And at our last arena, one of the drivers of injustice that we talked about was a lack of effective knowledge brokerage, which means that useful information on sustainability initiatives as well as their benefits is not effectively shared or equally shared with social groups or among disciplines in cities. And as a result, this can constrain the potential for both sustainability and justice. And we all know the saying, knowledge is power. And so sharing lessons and ideas between places on justice-oriented sustainability initiatives has the potential to enhance participation, to enable uptake of innovations that benefit all groups in society. But later on, we'll get into some more critical points of how learning between cities doesn't always pan out in a just way. But I did want to make that point just from the beginning. Now, in this arena specifically, we have aimed to similarly share experiences of governance for sustainable and just cities that have originally popped up in certain places across Europe. And our task has been to package this and to find a way to share these insights in a way that's useful to you. And we've done this, as we described yesterday, in the form of our enabling governance arrangements and our governance scenarios. In terms of the governance arrangements, we have discussed them yesterday. So if you're just joining us for the first time today, you might want to check them out on our wiki. Maybe Jakob, if you can post a link to that in the chat, that'd be helpful. Before our afternoon session, that might be a good idea to do. In terms of our governance scenarios, as I mentioned, we had our pre-arena webinar back in February, and this is where we really took a deep dive into these scenarios. And I'll spend just a minute on them now. Briefly, for those of you who don't know, I've made a screenshot on the right-hand side of the slide here of one of our governance scenarios. And they're very short and imaginative descriptions of an initiative for sustainability and justice in a particular place. And at that webinar, we got feedback on these scenarios. And I have to say, we certainly gained an appreciation for how challenging it can be to share examples between places. And you can see up on the slide some of the main feedback that we got. So these scenarios as a tool for sharing knowledge were helpful on one hand for imagining alternatives, to get inspired a little bit by the themes that were there. And a lot of you really liked that we included information on challenges in these scenarios that were faced by the initiatives as they were trying to develop. But on the other hand, a lot of the feedback we got was that it still remains quite difficult to overcome differences in context between the place that developed the initiative, which was described in the scenario, and places that might want to learn from them, for example. And then also, although there was good information on challenges, many people were left hungry for more detail on how they were overcome. And so maybe just keep these points in mind, because I'm going to revisit them in a few minutes later on in the presentation. But thank you again, everybody, for your input who came to the pre-arena webinar. So enough about scenarios. I'm going to take a step back and just focus on learning. And starting from the beginning, there are many different ways that social scientists have understood or explained learning between cities, but I won't get into a super academic presentation right now. But one of the main terms that's been used in this space to describe learning between cities is translocal learning. And really what this means is it's the sharing of locally rooted knowledge with people in other places. So most of the amazing initiatives that we've gotten to know in Urbana have their roots somewhere, but their branches reach wide and far, and they impact people in other places that can learn from them. So they set examples of governance for sustainable and just cities in action. And the process of this knowledge traveling has been called translocal learning. So how might this happen? Briefly, many of you may know because you probably engage in this often, but translocal learning can take many forms. And sometimes it's as simple as a phone call from one person to another. Other times it can be attending a conference like this. And often learning occurs through networks of actors who have mutual interests. So a case study document, for example, or it can be through hands-on direct engagement between different cities that are involved. Now, translocal learning, a lot of people are excited about it. There's a lot of promise that it holds, and it's seen as a way for urban areas to address their common challenges with regards to sustainability and justice. So for example, those of energy, mobility, and housing. And as Philip said earlier, each city has its unique context, but there are common struggles. And so this is the basis that we in its simplest form, learning between places can come in the form of inspiration. So visions of a desirable future for one city often come from what's already been done elsewhere. But beyond this, though, beyond this inspiration, there's also expectations of action, of results on the ground too. And this means leading to actual implementation of translocal learning that's resulted in on-the-ground change, for better or for worse in some places. We'll get to that in a minute, which is the global proliferation of the bus rapid transit innovation, which some of you might have heard of. So for those who haven't, the bus rapid transit innovation is an urban transit system based on really large capacity buses with dedicated lanes and priority at intersections. And it has this image of being flexible and fast and inexpensive to implement. Or at least it did a little while ago. I'm not sure what the current status is now. Maybe someone can let me know in the chat. I'd be happy about that. But really, so this innovation first arose in Latin America in the 70s, and it spread quickly after the 2000s before plateauing a little bit. And in Bogota, which has one of the biggest and most advanced bus rapid transit systems at the time of the study that I was getting this information from, which was a couple of years ago, it was considered a very inspirational site for best practice, for bus rapid transit best practice, from which many other cities have learned, especially in Asia. And it's claimed that this single example has helped with the replication and the implementation of bus rapid transit systems around the world. So we'll see, though, later that the outcome of this exercise of learning between places has not always been positive. But still, examples like this have, for the most part, strengthened this, what I've called the promise of translocal learning, that learning between cities can catalyze widespread change towards sustainable and just cities. And in a European context, the European Union's governance approach, urban governance approach, has been highly focused on transferring lessons learned between member state cities, and also replicating certain successful local pilot project initiatives. But as usual, it's important to kind of put on our critical thinking hats and think about this. So, and really question how well people in cities are learning from each other, and if there's any pitfalls that should be avoided with this. And for me, one red flag was raised when I read a couple of studies that found that some European sustainability best practices are hardly implemented. Well, why is this the case? What challenges might there be with learning between places that's hindering their implementation in other places? So this leads into a couple of challenges that are associated with learning between cities. Now, as seen as in our scenario feedback, we found it's quite difficult to communicate locally rooted knowledge. So this is because initiatives, as we know, are the products of various place-specific learning. And this place-specific learning is responding to new circumstances and opportunities and roadblocks that are thrown up. And all of these processes that are involved are very dynamic. They can be quite informal and involve a lot of trial and error, adaptation, experimentation, and really learning by doing. And so this very nature of local initiatives that are working towards sustainability and justice can be in conflict with expectations that they generate generalizable results that can be shared often as a solution for something in another city. So in some interviews I've done with individuals who produce and use the classic case study document, which might explain what, try to explain what's happening in another place.
I don't think we're going to worry about any of these comments from that family.
Someone needs to mute themselves, I think. Okay. So people who produce and use case study documents often say that it's very difficult to capture this complexity in a written form, at least. And this is how a lot of lessons are shared. So it's important to think about this itself. And then finally, you can see the last bullet point on the slide says sanitized stories. And that's a term I picked up from a best practice scholar. And she said that she often says that sustainability best practices are sanitized stories. So this means that they tend not to include this kind of information on the messy details and the challenges associated with these initiatives. And that hinders the ability of other people in other places to effectively learn from it. So if we think back to the scenario feedback, many of you liked that they included details on these difficulties, on these challenges, but even beyond that, you wanted more. And so this leads into the second point, which is even if learning materials are able to capture all of these challenges and these messy details, it remains difficult to overcome differences in context, as was raised earlier. Learning has been described as partial. So if you're learning about something specific place, it means a lot of these lessons intuitively increases with distance. So it is easier to learn between cities in the same country, for example, if they're subject to the same national policies, such as, if your government's in favor of community energy, then cities within that country are going to have fewer differences to overcome if they're learning from each other rather than from someone who's outside of that city. So these are some things to consider with challenges associated with differences in context. And this was illustrated in a conversation I had with a German municipal official back in last October. And we were talking about learning between places, and he's a big fan of it and loves learning from other places. But he said, really, one level is to get inspired by these places and to see, for example, that what they can do in Amsterdam or in Paris should be possible in Berlin. But he said if he's reading a 100-page long case document, he can only use the inspiration. He can only read the first 2 pages because the rest is from this different context, this different framework. And so from all of this, we can see that really the generalizability of many initiatives for sustainable and just cities is limited because of the context-specific nature that they have. And one final challenge that I wanted to go over brings back in this justice element. So sometimes translocal learning or learning between cities may lead to imposing an initiative, which is possibly framed as a solution to something, and consequently deepen injustices in the place that it's imposed. And there's a common concern shared that this careless transfer in a rather top-down way of an initiative from one place to another can ignore the needs and the priorities of the local people, as well as their special context that they have. And so there's also another question that's raised here, which is a bit more fundamental, and it really asks, who knows best? Who's in the position to say that this is a good initiative for you in your place? And the practice of learning between places runs the risk of this assumption that there's a group of people that knows what's best for people in another city. And so this assumption is basically the idea that if an initiative is successful in one place, that it should be wanted by and it should benefit people elsewhere. But we can see that this is not necessarily always the case, and it's kind of a dangerous assumption to make too. And an example of this that I wanted to bring in, again, links back to that bus rapid transit study. So after it spread to Asia in the early 2000s, there were some complaints by transport planners in India where it was being implemented in many cities there. And they were complaining that the bus rapid transit initiative was claimed to be a solution for everything, for all of their problems. And it replaced the implementation of more tailored solutions to the problems in their context.
Sophie, if you can hear me, can you maybe...
Did not.
Sophie?
Yeah, I can hear
Can
you.
you maybe close your camera because your connection is having some issues?
Oh, okay. Yeah, 1 second. Let me go back to Zoom. Stop video. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's on, like it's working 90% of the times, but
Okay. Well, you'll get 90% of what I'm saying then, and you can ask me later. But you can see my screen now, right?
yes.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. I'm just.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. It's good that people can hear what I'm saying. I'm also getting very close to the end here, so internet problem shouldn't be an issue in a moment. But just let me know if you can't hear me again. But just with this last example that I was talking about in India, this one planner was saying that the new bus rapid transit system there really didn't cater well to the needs of the poor and to the other marginal road users. And as a result of this, it actually was perceived as increasing social inequality in that city. And so we have these 3 points here about challenges with learning between cities. And it's important not to gloss over them. But I don't want to leave here with the impression that cities cannot learn from each other, because that would be very sad and untrue. And really, differences between places, I see them as being quite beautiful, you know? So translocal learning itself has been claimed to rest on this commitment that we learn through difference rather than in spite of it. And so, in other words, really the inspirational quality of initiatives for just and sustainable cities is made possible through their differences and not generic similarities. And so, keeping all of this in mind, what can we do? And I've come out with some solutions, not solutions, wrong word, suggestions for more effective and just learning between places. And you can see them up on the screen. I'll just go through them briefly. The first one is to increase accessibility of learning materials, really to make more friendly language and formats. But most importantly, I think, is to disseminate them outside of their usual circles. So this is important for avoiding the knowledge brokerage driver of injustice that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, where a lot of this information about initiatives for sustainable and just cities and their benefits is exclusive, and it's not shared equitably with all groups in society. So that's the first one. For the second one, when we're sharing information on things that we've done or that we've learned about, it's good to avoid sanitized stories. I really love that term with the alliteration there. But what this means, again, is to not smooth over these informal processes, the challenges faced, these more informal, messy bits, if possible. But often, as I said, it's hard to include these. And so we would instead encourage more active exchange where there's personal interaction, and especially where there's a strategy of purposeful exchange between the experience holder and the experience user. And within these types of active exchange, what is really important for overcoming injustices and not perpetuating injustices is to engage the affected groups in the communities where these initiatives might be implemented. So allow them to have opportunities to discuss their experiences and these potential solutions to see if they fit with their needs, with their context, with their wishes. And I guess I would say here that this is easier said than done. And even in the course of planning this arena, we've learned that it's a huge challenge to meaningfully engage with more underprivileged groups that don't typically have access to this information either. And that could be through language barriers, technology barriers, time constraints, and so on. But when we are sharing and digesting and implementing knowledge for sustainable and just cities, it's essential to at least make the effort, a good solid effort, to try and do this within our active exchange. So I will wrap up there. I hope everybody could hear me towards the end and that my internet was fine. But I would say, as Philip mentioned, we do have the opportunity for breakout rooms where we can gather your experiences with learning between places and your thoughts on this. So that will be very valuable to us to hear from you. But if not, you're also welcome to join the listening option. And Philip, I will hand things back over to you to explain those rooms now. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sophia, for sharing these insights and the suggestions as well, for setting the scene for what is going to come. And sorry, everybody, for the problems with intermittency in the transmission. That we will make sure that the slides are included in an email sent out next week. And maybe they can also be annotated. We'll have a look at this. But feel free to also follow up in email if you want any further reading. I can recommend